So, if you are listening to this right now on any major streaming app, the algorithm that's feeding you your next track is, well, it's completely agnostic.
Yeah, it really doesn't care about borders at all.
Right. I mean, you probably have playlists right now where, say, a pop singer in Los Angeles layers vocals over a beat made by a producer in Seoul.
Oh, absolutely.
And they're mixing in elements of, traditional folk or electronic dance and hip hop. We're just living in an era of this boundless genre-agnostic collaboration.
It is remarkably seamless today. The technological friction is just gone.
Totally. With the click of a mouse and a shared cloud drive, entirely different worlds of music are stitched together, and we just accept it.
Right. But because of that, it's actually really easy to forget that blending distinct cultures and sounds used to require an immense amount of physical effort.
Oh, yeah.
And often it required navigating some very real, very dangerous social friction.
Right. And that friction is exactly what we are jumping into today. The mission for this deep dive is to basically trace the DNA of our modern, limitless music landscape back to its rawest, most analog roots.
Which takes us to a very specific time and place.
Exactly. We are looking at a stack of sources today that take us straight into London in 1979 and 1980. We're unpacking the story of this revolutionary collective called the New Age Steppers.
And the label that birthed them, too, On You Sound.
Right, On You Sound. Together, they basically forged the blueprint for the genre-hopping production we hear all the time today.
It's just an incredibly vital piece of musical history because, the environment they were building this in wasn't some sterile recording booth or a globalized internet.
No, not at all.
It was a city that felt like it was basically tearing itself apart.
Okay, let's unpack this, because late 70s London was intensely fractured. You had the winter of discontent just in the rearview mirror.
Right. Massive youth unemployment.
Sweeping strikes all over the place.
Yeah.
And, of course, the rise of a new, highly conservative government.
Yeah, the social fabric was really fraying.
And culturally, there were these deep fault lines. I mean, you had the National Front marching in the streets, extreme racial discrimination against immigrant communities, and tensions that they would soon erupt into the Brixton riots.
It was a volatile mix.
It really wasn't a melting pot. It was a pressure cooker.
And that pressure cooker environment is the crucial context here, because usually when a society fractures that violently, people tend to retreat into their own isolated corner.
Sure, they just stick with their own kind.
Exactly. But what's fascinating here is that those very cracks in the pavement became the hotbed for a completely new kind of musical cross-pollination.
How so?
Well, the initial shockwave of punk rock had hit a few years prior, right? And by 1979, the kids in that post-punk scene were kind of looking around at the rubble.
They were over it.
Yeah, they had already abandoned traditional rock structures. The whole three-chord punk song felt like a dead end to them.
So what did they do?
So they started looking outward. They dove headfirst into Jamaican reggae, dub, African percussion, and early electronic noise.
Which, I mean, that makes sense on paper, right? Musicians looking for new influences. But practically speaking, I have a hard time visualizing this.
Oh, it's definitely an odd pairing.
You've got white post-punk kids who are, notoriously abrasive and cynical.
Right.
And then you have the Jamaican immigrant community steeped in the deep grooves and sort of the spiritual weight of roots reggae.
Two entirely different orbits.
Exactly. These are groups separated by geography, culture, and race in a city that is actively hostile to mixing. So how do they actually end up in a recording studio together?
Well, they needed a very specific kind of catalyst, and that catalyst was this 23-year-old producer named Adrian Sherwood.
In reading through the sources, Sherwood seems like an absolute anomaly.
He really was.
I mean, he's this young white guy, but since his teenage years, he had been running reggae distribution out of the back of vans.
Yeah, crushing records, driving them around.
And building highly authentic, trust-based relationships with Jamaican musicians.
He was entirely immersed in that world. But at the exact same time, he was a fixture in the underground London post-punk scene.
Really?
Yeah, he was hanging out with bands like The Slits, The Pop Group, and The Fall, and Sherwood recognized something that practically no one else did.
Which was?
Both of these groups, despite their wildly different sonic backgrounds, shared a profound alienation from mainstream British society.
They had a common enemy, essentially.
Exactly. They both harbored a deep distrust of the establishment.
So he decides to put them together. He forms the On You Sound label in 1979.
Right.
And his flagship project is the New Age Steppers. But let me stop here, Because initially, I just assumed this was a standard fusion band.
Like a typical lineup.
Yeah, like, okay, we've got a reggae bassist, a punk guitarist, let's write a chorus like the Police did.
Yeah, no, that's not what this was.
Right, the sources make it clear that this wasn't a band at all. So he wasn't just putting together a traditional band. It sounds like he was basically acting as a musical UN ambassador.
That's a great way to put it. What's fascinating here is that the New Age Steppers wasn't a band at all.
Right.
If you tried to lock these huge personalities into like a standard 5-record contract with a fixed lineup, it would have imploded in a week.
So how did it work?
They operated under a completely different framework. They were a mixed team, a fluid, ever-shifting collective.
So whoever is in the room that day is the band.
Exactly. Sherwood would book a studio, and you would literally have foundational Jamaican session legends from the Roots Radix setting up their gear.
We're talking guys like drummer Styles Scott and guitarist Benji Bunny.
Yeah, heavyweights. And they're setting up right next to radical, screaming post-punk vocalists like Mark Stewart from the pop group.
That is wild.
The membership was totally porous. They valued the actual collision of contact over maintaining any sort of rigid brand identity.
I love that concept, but mechanically, how does that not just result in a total mess?
Oh, it was definitely chaotic.
Because post-punk is all about aggression, right?
Yeah.
Minimalism and literally destroying the song.
Right, breaking it down.
While reggae and dub are all about deep, pocketed rhythm and space.
It's a fundamental clash of methodologies. And the way Sherwood managed that clash wasn't by trying to, like, smooth it out.
He didn't try to make them compromise.
No, not at all. Let's look at the dub element specifically. What is dub music fundamentally doing to a track?
Well, from what I gather, it's taking a pre-existing reggae track and stripping it down, like pulling out the vocals, boosting the drum and bass.
Right, but it's not just a basic remix. It's an architectural process.
What do you mean by architectural?
If you think of a standard pop song as a fully built house, a dub mix isn't about, repainting the walls or adding new furniture. It's about turning most of those walls completely invisible. So you're just left staring at the glowing structural beams, the foundation, and the echoes just bouncing around the empty rooms.
Wow, that's a great way to look at it. So it's an exercise in subtraction and spatial awareness.
Exactly.
And this is where the studio techniques detailed in the source material just blow my mind. Because Sherwood wasn't just sitting in the control room hitting record while the band jammed.
No, he was a very active participant.
He was using analog equipment, specifically things like the roll and space echo, spring reverbs, and literal tape splicing to turn the mixing desk itself into an instrument.
Yeah, we really need to pause on the roll and space echo because it is just central to this whole sound.
Okay, let's hear it.
Today, if a producer wants an echo, they click a plugin on their screen, right? And it calculates a mathematically perfect digital delay.
Sure, it's totally clean.
But the Roland Space Echo was a physical box. It contained an actual physical loop of magnetic tape running continuously over tape heads.
Oh, wow. So when the sound feeds into it, it's literally recording onto that tape loop and playing it back a fraction of a second later.
Yes. And because it's physical tape just rubbing against metal heads, the tape degrades over time.
That makes sense.
The motor fluctuates slightly, so every time the echo repeats, it gets a little grittier, a little darker, a little more unpredictable.
It is a living, breathing piece of machinery.
Exactly.
And that tactile nature changes everything, right? I mean, it sounds like taking a perfectly painted portrait, throwing it in a blender, and then pasting the pieces back together on a completely different canvas.
That's a perfect analogy because Sherwood is writing the faders on the mixing desk in real time.
Right.
He's physically catching a snare drum hit, throwing it into the space echo, and letting it regenerate into this massive cavernous noise.
While simultaneously taking a razor blade and physically slicing the recording tape to arrange the song.
Yes. It means the engineering is the composing. Half of a New Age Steppers track was practically written after the musicians put their instruments down.
That is incredible.
Sherwood called it a desktop dub mix. He would take these incredibly tight, locked-in grooves played by the Roots Radix, and he would clash them against the raw, almost feral energy of the punks.
Dropping the bass in and out, cranking the feedback, cutting the tape.
It created a really profound tension.
Okay, so Sherwood's production is the skeleton, and the Roots Radix provide the heartbeat.
Right.
But every collective needs a focal point, a soul. And for the New Age Steppers, the sources point entirely to Ari Up.
Yes, Ari Up is the defining spirit of this project. She was already famous as the teenage vocalist for the incredibly influential punk band The Slits.
Right.
But within the New Age Steppers, she became something entirely transcendent.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Her vocal delivery is, it's completely unhinged in the best possible way.
Absolutely.
The sources describe it as this wild hybrid of Jamaican toasting, post-punk shrieking, and this almost manic, joyous energy.
It really is.
There's a specific mention of her covering the classic reggae track Fade Away on their first album. She isn't just singing the notes, she sounds like she's physically wrestling with the song.
Yeah, like tearing at the seams.
It's shaking and dancing as this pure energy of resistance against the bleak society around them.
It's a completely primal delivery. She's taking a roots reggae standard about the transient nature of wealth and power and injecting it with the immediate visceral anxiety of 1980s London.
And it wasn't just an aesthetic choice either. It wasn't posturing,
No, not at all.
because her ties to the Jamaican community were genuine,
Yeah.
and the collective itself was living the resistance they were putting on tape.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, that is a vital point to understand about the New Age Steppers.
Right?
Now, we aren't taking sides on these 1980s political stances here, right? For you listening, we're just observing how this played out historically.
Sure.
But regardless of the heavy anti-capitalist politics they were preaching, the historical reality is that their very existence was a radical action.
Just being together.
Exactly. In a city where racial tensions were boiling over into street violence, where society was telling everyone to stay in their segregated lanes.
Yeah.
Simply gathering immigrants and white youths into the same physical room to create art was a monumental cultural statement during a time of serious skinhead violence.
So the collaboration was the protest.
Precisely. They didn't even need to write explicitly political lyrics every time because the multicultural experiment of their production was the politics made manifest.
That makes total sense. But logically, that level of intensity, combining raw punk volatility, laid-back dub musicians, a society in turmoil, and a producer slicing up tape like a mad scientist.
Yeah.
That's a recipe for a beautiful explosion, not a long-term career. So how does a fluid collective like this actually survive over time? Do they just burn out?
Well, they progress by burning incredibly bright and very fast. Their timeline is essentially a massive burst of creative energy over just 3 years.
Wow, just 3 years.
Yeah. They dropped their self-titled debut album in 1981. That album really set the standard.
That had Ari Up's massive presence and the fadeaway cover, all glued together by Sherwood's desktop dub. But they didn't coast on that sound. The sources note they released a second album, Action Battlefield, later that exact same year.
They were fast.
And the sound shifted dramatically, leaning heavily into post-punk aggression. Why this sudden change?
The sound shifted because the mixed team shifted. On Action Battlefield, the influence of Mark Stewart from the pop group became much more prominent.
Oh, all right.
So naturally, the music skewed heavier, more agitated, leaning hard into the abrasive post-punk side of the equation.
Reflected the street-level tensions of 1981, I guess.
Very much so. It's a very combative record.
But then we get to 1983, and they release Foundation Steppers. Yeah. And the sources say this one actually settles into a much more stable, recognizable reggae groove.
It does.
Why did the pendulum swing back? Did the punks just kind of burn out?
It was a combination of factors. Some of the punk collaborators were focusing on other projects, which allowed the core Jamaican session players to anchor the sound more firmly.
Makes sense.
Simultaneously, Adrian Sherwood was maturing rapidly as a producer. His desk skills were becoming more refined, more deeply pocketed in traditional dub methodology, so Foundation Steppers ends up being their most cohesive reggae album.
Even while maintaining their experimental edge.
Exactly.
So you have this incredibly dense, volatile trilogy of albums from 1981 to 1983, and then there's just a massive gap. The New Age Steppers essentially disappear as an active name.
Yeah, the collective simply dissolved back into the ether. The individuals went off to do other things within the On You Sound network.
Sherwood went on to produce for some huge names, right?
Oh, yeah. Everyone from Depeche Mode to Nine Inch Nails. It seemed like the New Age Steppers were just a brilliant, closed chapter of the early 80s.
Right, until a deeply tragic event forces the book back open.
Yeah.
In 2010, Ari Up passes away.
She was only 48 years old. It was a devastating shock to that entire musical community.
And especially to Adrian Sherwood, I imagine.
Definitely. They had maintained a lifelong creative bond.
And his reaction to that grief is fascinating to me.
Yeah.
He doesn't just put out a press release or something.
No, he goes back to the archives.
He gathers up unreleased takes, old analog recordings, and final vocal tracks that Ari had been working on right before her death.
And he painstakingly assembles them into one final posthumous album in 2012 called Love Forever.
Capturing her final creative energies.
It's a deeply moving piece of work. Love Forever essentially closes the loop on the New Age Steppers' history.
Yeah.
It honors Ari Up's enduring spirit and provides a final resting place for a collective that honestly had always refused to stay in one place.
It's a beautiful tribute. But as we look at the whole arc of this story, I want to connect the dots for you listening right now.
Right.
Because you might be wondering, okay, this is a cool slice of 1980s underground history. But so what? What does this all mean for you, the listener, today? Why does a defunct 1980s collective matter in 2026?
Well, the sources are adamant that the New Age Steppers weren't just a quirky experiment.
They were the nucleus for everything On You Sound did later, like African Head Charge.
Yes. And more importantly, their collective ideology directly birthed the famous Bristol scene in the 1990s.
Oh, wow. We're talking about the trip-hop movement, right? Bands like Massive Attack and Tricky.
Exactly. And it wasn't just some coincidental parallel, it was a physical lineage.
Really?
Yeah, people like Mark Stewart moved in those Bristol circles. The sound system culture in Bristol was heavily absorbing the On You Sound methodology.
So they were paying attention.
Very much so. When Massive Attack released their groundbreaking album, Blue Lines, they weren't operating as a rock band, they were operating as a mixed team.
Oh, right.
They brought in guest reggae singers like Horace Andy, mixing him with hip-hop beats and atmospheric punk aesthetics.
They adopted Sherwood's exact approach, just updated for the sampler era.
Precisely.
Which brings us all the way back to the scenario we opened with. The 21st century artist sitting at a laptop, casually jumping genres, collaborating globally, and blending engineering with composing.
Yeah.
The New Age Steppers prototyped that entire mindset 40 years ago. They just did it the hard way, with analog tape.
They proved that music shouldn't be divided by nationality or genre.
Their sound was rough, destructive, and just bouncing with tension. But at its core, it was about one thing: absolute freedom.
It really was. And, New Age Steppers used analog tape and mixing desks to literally bridge a massive volatile cultural divide in 1980s London.
Yeah, they brought people together physically.
Right. Which raises an important question for you to consider today.
Okay, let's hear it.
In an era where we have infinite digital tools and the ability to collaborate with anyone on Earth instantly, are we actually using our technology to bridge our own social fractures? Or have our modern tools actually made our music and our culture more isolated than these analog pioneers? Something to really think about next time you hit play.